of you in a heartfelt namaste. I, Anuradha, would like to thank all of you for writing in your comments and suggestions on our YouTube and Spotify channels and subscribing to those channels. Today, we are going to talk about drinking. Drinking can be of two types, social as well as alcoholism. When we talk about social drinking, we need to check out the 5th house or the 11th house, because social drinking is a norm in many societies and cultures. And when a person is happy, wants to move around in a group and express their happiness, most of the times people do take to a certain amount of spirit, which is within very limited lines. But as these limited lines become crossed and a person moves further and further due to circumstances, due to mental inability to say no or stop the intake of spirits at all times, this turns into alcoholism. Alcoholism is a problem that not only creates a lot of problems for the person concerned, but also for those around him or her. It takes away a chunk of a person's income and can seriously be a telling factor on the upbringing of the children, on family matters, and not to mention the job of the person. So that is something that one needs to encounter. But first, how does it look in a person's chart? How do we make out that the person can be turning towards alcoholism? So how to check the drinking habits of the person astrologically is the subject of our video today. The houses play a very pivotal role when we talk about alcoholism. On the onset, the 3rd house is the house that is of primary importance. 3rd house is the house of your mental capabilities. It is the house of your courage and determination. When a person has a weak 3rd house or a highly afflicted 3rd house, then the person may not have the courage to stop himself or herself from moving deeper into this pit. Again, I repeat, it is also the standards would be dependent on the Desh Kalpatra or the person, society, and the times in which one resides. But the 3rd house is very important because it is from here everything starts. 3rd house is new beginning. So when one wants to come out of this habit also, one has to see the positive influences on the 3rd house. So we also talk about the 6th house. The 6th house is the house of the Shadripus, or it is also the house of 6 enemies, not just on the outside, but also inside of the person. And bad habits do form a part of these Shadripus. The 6th house is the house which gives us our standard habits also. The 8th house. Many a times in life, there are many things that become a constant. Be it an addiction, be it a disease, these things are constant. And honestly, addictions also are a form of disease where we are unable to come out of it, let go of. So alcoholism could also be seen from the affliction of the 3rd house, 8th house, which is long term. The 12th house shows a lot of spending. It also shows a lot of waste, and it also shows loss of money and seclusion. As a person becomes more and more alcoholic, the person shuns society and starts living in their own world. They start to cocoon themselves in their own area, not wanting to come out of that haze of that frame of mind. So the 12th house becomes very active because of loss of wealth and also the loss of communication with people. So the 3rd, 6th, and the 12th houses, as we see it, are very important when we talk about the alcoholic habits, and in particular, the 3rd house is the most important. Now let us talk about the planets. The first planet we need to check out is Rahu. Rahu denotes something artificial. It denotes habits of people, and Rahu in the 3rd house invariably makes the 3rd house weak or prone to a person to become nervous. A person becomes afflicted with a lot of thought process that can make a person jittery about their future and can really be a problem when they need to show courage. These people show courage at the last moment or sometimes in bursts of anger. But to get a control over your senses is important, and Rahu does not want people to get a control over their senses. Mercury is a planet of, as Mercury is called a Kumar, Kumar means a young child, highly impressionable. So if your Mercury is highly afflicted, especially by Rahu or aspected by Rahu and also Saturn, in that case, the depressive mind thoughts come in very easily, and the thought process, the mind is quite adaptable to taking up drinking habits. Mercury also represents the younger siblings. It also represents friends. So most of the times, if Mercury is afflicted, one could be sitting in the company where all these things could be just a part of life. And again, such a person could be drawn towards these things, which could later lead on to addiction. We also take up the mind, the moon. Moon is the mind. Moon is also liquid things. Moon is saline. And again, if this moon is in contact with Saturn, which talks of something old, then it can so happen that the person would be prone to drinking things which have been fermented over a period of times, like wine, which has grapes where the grapes are fermented. I repeat here again that we need to take in the Desh Kalpat, because many a times in many societies, yes, this is an acceptable fact, but in many societies, it isn't. So these people could be attracted to drink something which is fermented, which has been kept for a long period of time, and that is allowed in their society. So these things can also be taken a good look at. And one more thing is, since moon is the mind, and if the mind is afflicted, if the moon is afflicted, the person can not have that much of willpower to hold themselves against these bad habits, or these habits as we may want to call it. So we move on to then the final planet, Venus. Venus talks about the luxuries of life. Venus also talks about liquids, and it also talks about when it is with fiery planets, it could also talk about fiery drinks like whiskey and things like that. Also with Rahu, it can show an addiction or a movement of Rahu in those areas where a person can be drawn towards drinking. Then there are few nakshatras which obviously do talk about these habits. The first one in the line is Mriksir. Mriksir is a person can be in constant search for a number of things that could lead a person to a lot of frustration and finally lead a person towards drinking. Adra is the nakshatra of Rahu itself in the Vimshotri Dasha, and what more, a person could isolate himself or herself and could take up these habits. Aslesha talks about poisoning, and too much of anything is bad, and too much of drinking also leads to poisoning and disruption in the system. What starts as a social drinking can end up as addiction. And Vishakha Nakshatra and the Jeshta Nakshatra to follow talks about that culture also. Many a times we find that people are extremely unhappy or extremely overwhelmed by their situations, and they do not feel that there's a way out. To numb that pain, to numb that frustration, they could take up to drinking, which could be shown in Purva Bhadra. And when the nakshatra of Hasta is highly afflicted, one brings about that problem to his or her own self. Finally, Mula again shows anger and frustration, and to get out of that anger and frustration, one could resort to these means, which obviously are not very accommodating. So we are moving on to a few charts. We can take the chart of Al Pacino. I told you right at the beginning that there is a remedial measure, that is when we have a good planet aspecting Jupiter, or a unafflicted Venus, then a person can affecting your moon, then a person has the chance of coming out of such a stupor or such a problematic zone. In case of Al Pacino, we see that his Rahu is placed in the third house. It is also aspecting Mercury, which is the lord of the ninth house, third house, and the 12th house, as stated in the houses above. So we see that Mercury, or the mind, or the third house where of rational thinking, of the one which can give you a control, is also afflicted. What more, Venus, which is with Mars, a fiery planet, is also afflicted by Rahu and has no positive influence over it. So in absence of any family, which has been said by Al Pacino, because fourth house also talks about your mother, security, etc. He took on to drinking as he was overwhelmed by the success of Godfather and didn't know how to handle it. We also see that the moon, which is the Lagna Lord, is unafflicted. And though aspected by Mars, which is also the Yoga Karaka, is also aspected by the sixth Lord and the ninth Lord, Jupiter. The ninth Lord talks about our teachers, preceptors. 10th Lord talks about profession. Very beautifully, it was one of the teachers of Al Pacino who shook him up, told him to come out of it. So when we see if the mind, the Lagna, or is aspected, the moon is aspected by a benefic like Jupiter, then there is somebody who can counsel us. We have to see who that person would be and can counsel us and help us come out of that. The dasha, the transit, also should be conducive enough for a person to restrain himself or herself and come out of it. It was the last time that Al Pacino had a drink, and he never then went back to his habit again. In case of Arjun Rampal, who's an Indian actor and has a problem with alcoholism, he has his third Lord Jupiter along with Rahu, that is Rahu-Ketu, on the Rahu-Ketu axis, and his 12th Lord Mercury, which is retrograde. So he keeps coming back to that problem time and time again, is aspected by a retrograde Saturn, giving him a huge problem, and a problem which is long drawn. This Saturn incidentally is in the 8th house of a long drawn issue. We then move on to the chart of Winston Churchill. In Winston Churchill's case, we see Rahu is in the 8th house, giving it a long run problem, and it also aspects the third Lord, which again is on the Rahu-Ketu axis. There was a time when the king of the country gave up on drinking, but Winston Churchill would not give up on his drinking. Drew Barrymore also shares the same history, and she also has her 8th Lord Jupiter in its own nakshatra of Purva Bhadra, and she took up drinking and drugs at a very young age. She had a constant fight with it because there is a strong aspect of Rahu not only on the third house but on Jupiter. So there was a constant struggle with it, and she was tenacious enough to understand that she needed to come out of it, or she could be in a real soup. So there were also planetary combinations. This is a beautiful Jupiter, Mars, which is also moon, which is also looking at this Jupiter. And this Jupiter this moon is not afflicted at all. So it makes it very pretty clear that her moon, her third Lord, helped her come out of it, in spite of the fact that the third house is afflicted by Jupiter. So there was a long-term problem. The problem persisted for a longer period, but the moon actually helped her. We can also take up the case of Sanjay Dutt. In Sanjay Dutt's case, we have Rahu in Hasta Nakshatra, and it not only afflicts the 11th house, which talks about spending a lot of money on these activities. It also afflicts the third house, and being afflicting the third house, it shows that he didn't have a control over his habits. His habits have been long drawn. It's a known case in Bollywood that he has become an alcoholic. He started smoking at a very young age, and nobody else but he himself took it up as a challenge or introduced himself. It was his own childish prank on his parents that he started smoking, or he did it for his own enjoyment, and it later on went on to become a huge problem for him. So we can see that this is a problem that people can face, but how can people come out of it is a classic case that we can understand from Al Pacino's chart. In his chart, we see that the Jupiter aspects the moon. It is an unafflicted moon also. The moon needs to be unafflicted. In case of, if we take up the case of Drew Barrymore, we would be happy to know that because this moon is again unafflicted and aspects Jupiter, so she was again able to have some sort of tenacity in life. So it's very important to have a good period, to have an aspect of a good planet, benefic planet on the third house, third lord, or of Jupiter, to be able to come out of this kind of problems in life. Till we meet with you again, stay tuned. Do write in, because many a times people tell me to take charts, but these, in such cases, we are not able to take the charts because they're personal charts. My readings prompted me to make this video. Till we meet with you again.
Please hit the bell icon for fresh updates. Don't forget to like, share, and comment on the videos, and please subscribe to our channel.